Bennett.
I'm Gavin Ashenden.
Same time. That's no good. That's going to cost me some editing time. Okay, so this week we would like to speak about the 44-year-old woman, Carla Foster, who has been jailed for taking drugs sent to her by BPAS during lockdown, which she took, which would normally induce an abortion. And I think, is it before 10 weeks? They're normally prescribed. Is it before 10 weeks gestation? Something like that. But she had lied to them and told them that she was maybe 10 weeks pregnant and was in fact 8 months pregnant. So she's been jailed, and there's been it's been used by a number of people to push to get rid of the upper limit on abortion. So we'll talk about that. And also it's June, so it's Pride Month. And Gavin, I know you've written about the flags for the Catholic Herald, which is a fantastic piece. Do go and read it. And also we thought we might talk about the stem cell research. So what is it? They've managed to create what they say is a synthetic embryo, but in fact it isn't truly synthetic. So we could talk about the ethics of that. So maybe we'll begin with that, shall we? Gavin, over to you. I know you've done a interview this afternoon on GB News. So why should we be worried about
it was rather difficult because I wasn't sure I was on top of the science, but the way their science is being presented meant I didn't really have to be. Essentially, I was talking with the doctor, and he put the journalist right and said, we're not anywhere near creating life, as the headline suggested. What they're trying to do is discover why embryos die. And to do that, they've created, it's not even really a synthetic embryo, but it's but having done that, what they can do is discover why, or what might get in the way of life. But the real issue is that so I've got pigeons doing exciting things outside the door. The real issue is how, given the speed of scientific research, how do the ethical laws that society uses to govern them keep up? And the answer to that is that they can't. And so one of the things I was saying was that it's politicians, not scientists, who frame laws. And the politicians we have at the moment can't tell the difference between a man and a woman. They don't know what a woman is. So the very people who are unable to tell us what a woman is are the people who are going to frame the complicated ethical laws that will govern the way we do scientific research. Well, that's really quite problematic. And then the doctor who was speaking said that actually the good guys, in his view, were the Americans and the Brits who followed the laws. There were lots of people who didn't, and that included the Chinese. And he gave an example of the Chinese having created Siamese twins and reprogrammed their DNA to do something so ethically problematic that even the Chinese put the doctors in prison. Effectively, what we're facing is something that's that AI is presenting us with as well. But AI will get here much, much faster than the capacity to create life. And it is simply, how do we frame ethics to deal with our technological cleverness? And one of the problems we have is that there's been no progress at all on ethics. We don't, even within our own society, agree on Judeo-Christian ethics. Plenty of secularists and humanists would reject Judeo-Christian ethics. If we can't even do it within our own society, how can we do it across the world? How can ethics keep up with science? They can't. We're heading for a dystopia. So it's excellent the scientists, in one sense, are being able to develop their capacity to keep embryos alive, but the implications are really very problematic.
It always begins, doesn't it, with an attempt to alleviate suffering, surrogacy, IVF, poor people who can't have children naturally, the infertile. Let's reach out and help them. But it always ends with gay couples having kids that they, simply because they choose to put their sperm somewhere that isn't fertile ground. So it begins with this, isn't it nice, and shouldn't we go on board with it, and ends in this way as we're seeing it. First of all, what ethic is then driving this, if it's not Judeo-Christian ethics, Mark? And also, what would we say in response to those people who say, well, aren't you cruel? Because all we want to do is create embryos to help understand miscarriage and help women who are suffering with miscarriage. And it's all under this narrative of being decent and kind and caring and compassionate. But we know it's wrong. So how can we say that?
Yeah, well, it's really difficult, isn't it? It's a difficult thing to even get into because personally, to me, it just seems so obviously wrong on so many levels. And I think Gavin put his finger on it there exactly, that it's if we the more as we increasingly abandon our own ethical principles, and then how do we measure any of these things? To me, it seems to be an increasing commodification of the human person. That seems to be very difficult to avoid. And as we get, culture seems to be the conversation I'm having at work, with the kids, like the young guys who work with me and stuff, about the way that everything, like a lot of the young people seem to have this idea now that they should all be earning 100 grand a year, that, that everyone needs to be on footballers' salaries. You don't have to do anything for it except show your boobs on the internet, really. And they don't seem to have much of a problem. There's just no ethical reasoning behind anything they do. It's all about ease of traffic, and so it's very unsurprising if you take all the moral breaks off everything. Where do you start when they've flushed everything down the toilet the way that they have, and we end up in a situation where you're on the way to making like human beings out of stem cells. Whatever the setup is, whatever way they justify it, the moral implications are just so massive. It's horrendous. It's like sci-fi nightmare from Hollywood, isn't it? And it seems everything is coming true these days. So don't really have to even respond to it.
Science has been mocking religion for the last 30 years. Dawkins and others have been saying that they're the ones who are really dealing with truth, and the religious people are from the Stone Age. But they were completely wrong. The problem with scientists are that they're not primarily concerned with ethics. They're not ethicists. They're interested in their own research and their own careers and their own intellectual development. And they accept constraint by the people who fund them and by governments. But again, there's no overall view about what science should be doing or who scientists should be accountable to. And one of the problems is we become technologically very developed whilst we're going backwards with our ethics. Somebody put up on Twitter a very beautiful picture of a medieval cathedral, and was talking to a builder friend, and the builder friend said, we can't do that anymore. We've no idea how they did it. We can't build the beautiful things they built. So the whole issue of progress that lies behind science is completely misrepresented and malformed. And the only way in which ethics can keep up with it is not if ethics develops and goes forward, but if people return to ethics in order to try and compare different ethical systems. And one of the reasons we're Catholics is because the three of us have looked at different ethical systems, and we found in Catholic Christianity the most developed, the most robust, and the most redemptive. And that's one of the reasons why we do Catholic Unscripted. We're trying to build a bridge between us and the technological acrobats who do science without any understanding of what the implications are of their technological gymnastics.
That is like every Hollywood movie. Am I speaking completely out of turn? It doesn't matter, Jurassic Park or Deep Blue Sea or you name it. It's always the scientist heads off in this,
Yeah.
and they're just focused on their research, and they're doing it for the best of reasons, yeah. And and then the dinosaurs start eating the people. Like it's just, it feels to me like we're sleepwalking into our own dystopian nightmare, and no one seems to be able to stop it on so many levels. I mean, the AI thing is exactly the same thing, isn't it? It's like, I mean, I don't know. Perhaps I grew up watching too many films, but it's very difficult to see an upside to any of this. And I had a really interesting conversation with my friend who's a consultant. What's the word? The doctors who look after dying people. Can't remember what it is now, but he's one of them. And palliative care consultant. And he was saying to me, we had a chat on Monday night, and he was saying that like he's recently become a Christian. And he was saying even before he was a Christian, he could recognize that there was power in suffering. that there was something incredibly powerful and redemptive and valuable in suffering. And he was talking about euthanasia and saying even before he was a Christian, he could see that there was something devastatingly problematic about cutting that whole experience out of the human experience. A kind of commodification where we say, okay, this is the clinical level on which we want to experience life, and the parameters either for the preborn or for the elderly or the sick or whatever. That's it. We just draw a line and we finish it. And but that I found that extraordinarily profound, that he was prepared to admit that, even before he was a Christian, that he could recognise that there was some. And from my own experience working with handicapped people and stuff like that, it's the most profoundly handicapped, that we think that there's no quality to their life I'm talking as an 18-year-old boy or whatever, being put in a room with someone in a wheelchair, paraplegic, and told to look after him. And initially you think there's absolutely, there's nothing there. And then this incredible personality emerges.
Yeah.
And, it becomes a really powerful experience where you begin to understand what it means to be a human person way beyond your own experience.
Yeah. Because now everything is reduced to a quality of life and a utilitarian argument. The US CCB document on stem cell research is well worth looking at, and talks about that very problem of the false assumption that a good end can justify direct killing. It's the source of much evil in the world. And it says this utilitarian ethic has especially disastrous consequences when used to justify lethal experiments on fellow human beings in the name of progress. No commitment to a hoped for greater good can erase or diminish the wrong of taking directly another innocent human life. And it says, in fact, policies undermining our respect for human life can only endanger the vulnerable patients that stem cell research offers to help. The same ethic that justifies taking some lives to help the patient with Parkinson's or Alzheimer's disease today can be used to sacrifice that very patient tomorrow if his or her survival is viewed as disadvantaging other human beings. That's the problem, isn't it? Once you say, well, look at this good outcome, we must be able to justify it, and that's the ground of your ethic, then it's not going to stop you utilizing another human being at the other end of life, perhaps. So yeah, it's a worrying trend. But abortion. So the next case is the woman who has been jailed for taking a poison that would kill her baby that was about to be born just a few weeks from natural birth, and she's been jailed. And this news has been met by some with great criticism of the law, and saying this is a reason why we need to scrap the law. Women should be allowed to choose to have an abortion right up to birth. And by others who say, although it's a tragic case and she's a mother and she's been jailed, it's absolutely right that she has been, because she has killed another human person. You're right, Mark.
Sorry.
What do you
I'm
think?
going to run out of battery in a minute.
What do you think? What do you think about this, Mark?
Well, before Gavin gives us the pearls of wisdom, this is just for me. I'm just going to step out of the room because it's just, this is just black and white. It's craziness. And how do we expect it to go if we're going to start down this road? It's BPAS who've killed her.
Yeah.
They've killed her by making this, they killed the baby by making it and put her in this awful situation.
Mm-hmm.
And if our leaders, if our moral guardians haven't got any respect for any of these things, then this is the way that I just think it's absolutely atrocious. I'm morally outraged from Essex.
Yeah.
Catherine, what was the phrase you used about the slippery slope? You wrote about this, and you began by writing something really quite witty about slippery slopes, which this embodies.
I don't know. I'd have to look at it. I think I said anyone who doubts that slopes are slippery either hasn't been to Collie Hill in February or hasn't been looking at the response to this case, because this is the inevitable result of saying, of what's already essentially abortion on demand, but now being pushed, and it's being pushed by the WHO, So the World Health Organization are saying that it's against, you know, that they're saying that actually there should be no barriers to a woman choosing to have an abortion at any point up to birth. There should be no policy barriers. And as we record this today on Saturday the 17th, there are BPAS and others, I can't remember, a number of people who are marching at the Royal Courts of Justice demanding that this old law, based on a law 1872, I think, acts against the human person, that this be overturned so that a woman who did this would no longer be, there'd be no consequences for this. So, like you, Mark, morally outraged from South London. Huh?
Yeah. And there's no one online is talking about the children. That's what I can't believe.
It's an 8-month-old child who's been poisoned, and it's poisoned in the post. And the government have allowed the medical establishment to send her poison to kill her viable 8-month-old child. And one of the things I think we can take away from this, apart beyond the horror of a mother doing that, and also, I mean, of course, we have to be very sorry for the mother carrying an 8-month-old child who, in her own mind, was sufficiently disturbed that she was willing to continue to try to do away with it. The child must have been kicking and moving, and I mean, it's a terrible situation for both mother and child. The mother has the power because the state sent her poison in the post. But one of the things that we come away from, I think, is every time we have an ethical argument, the progressives say, you shouldn't have any absolute values. Let's build in a whole series of gradated exceptions to it. And then those of us who take a more absolutist stand say, well, if you do that, you will simply destroy the moral framework that is meant to contain us. And the progressives say, no, we're clever enough and wise enough and moderate enough not to do that. That was exactly the argument they used over abortion from the Abortion Act. And now we have an 8-month-old preborn child being killed by poison in the post. So I think one of the things we do, rather than say hard things about the mother and sympathetic things to the poor child, is we say we feel that we're justified in calling people back to an absolutist moral framework in which these kind of exceptions that people use to justify greater freedom are not implemented because our society doesn't have the wisdom and the self-restraint to actually handle them properly. And the same thing is going to happen with euthanasia. That's the fear.
Yeah, I think you're absolutely right. And that's really what frustrates me more than anything else, is the fact that they've put the mother in a situation where this is a completely reasonable choice. If you're not informed from a pro-life point of view or from a Christian ethical point of view, or you know, then why can't she kill a baby as far as she's concerned? Because it's legal. You know, it's completely de rigueur as far as most people are concerned. They, you know, and I see this when I do catechesis for young people, young Catholics at 14, 15. And one of the things that I do is do a quiz where I get them to answer some ethical questions. And it's a series of questions. It doesn't start with abortion, but it leads up to a question about abortion. And they all think it's, you know, year after year, you see 95% of the kids, there might be 2 or 3 in the class with a better grasp of it out of 40 or 50 kids. But basically, they'll all say, yeah, they like it's, you know, they should have bought the child because it's the end of their life. And this is what culture is building. This is the attitude that it's building, is that human beings are disposable. This is, in both cases, it's exactly the same thing, isn't it?
Yeah.
And what I find difficult is that we are left on our slippery slope. You know, that we've been with all these things. You know, you could say the same thing about gay marriage, couldn't you? Is that was a lot of the arguments were, you know, well, and it's again, it's all these things come true, and then we're left sort of going, oh, we told you so, and I don't know how useful any of that is. But this is one of my favourite sayings: is burn it all down. You know, it's going to collapse, so let's just let it all burn down, and then we'll rebuild from the ashes, which is what Christendom has done for millennium.
Yeah. I think it should open the path actually for us to have the conversation about when life begins, because to us as Catholics, we see no difference between an abortion carried out at any point, or at 6 months or at 8 months. And so when you make it about a time limit, then it's taking away from the absolute point, which is that it's a human person.
What is this? Some magical process that happens as the child comes out of the womb that changes it from a clump of cells into a human person? I don't understand how people can't see that if it's a child in the womb, it's a child, And all the other thing in society that I find so strange is the way that if you want the child, then people talk about the child. Oh, it's a baby, and they called it Fred, and there's all this stuff goes on,
the tube saying
and
baby.
then, but if they don't want the child, then and I mean, from a philosophical point of view, the first thing you do is depersonalize something if you want to attack it. And I mean, that's so obvious in the way that it's spoken about on the media and all kinds of things. It's just atrocious, really is. It's like, I mean, we shouldn't say it, should we? But it's like euthanasia, or it's like a genocide,
Yeah, it is a genocide.
It's like the Nazis, Gavin.
Yeah, it is. It is like the Nazis.
It's the same topics, everything. Oh dear.
Talking of
flags. Well, we've got flags. Flags are a new topic.
Talking of slippery slopes, we move on to the fact that it's Pride Month, and I don't know if anyone's noticed, but there's rainbow flags everywhere, adorning every street and wrapped around the Arc de Triomphe, and you can't escape it, and kids are being asked to celebrate it. And one thing that is, just so obviously problematic, and it goes back to the question about abortion that runs through all of this. It's how blind are people. The pride flag has now begun to encompass so much that it also encompasses maps, minor attracted persons, and there are teachers walking around school with rainbow lanyards and flag waving in schools with a symbol that supports people who are paedophiles. It's staggering that this is happening, and yet it is. And Gavin, you wrote about the erection of the flag, the pride flag, and the pulling down of the national flag, which is an utter disgrace. So tell us more about that.
Well, so let's change things, and let's talk about straight people and flags, because we haven't done much of that. And so, and the reason we're talking about straight people as we talk about the pride flag is because, first of all, what we begin with is the experience on the media that the White House had this enormous pro-pride celebration, and it gave the pride flag pride of place in the White House set up. And a lot of American conservatives wrote in saying this is against the Constitution. There are rules saying that the Stars and Stripes must take precedence, and then the lawyers say, yeah, well, right on the very top of the building there was a Stars and Stripes, you just can't see it, but technically we kept the rules. But that wasn't the point, of course. The point was that the pride flag was right in your face. And interestingly enough, at this particular event in the White House, there's a trans activist who's quite well known, who had paid for a very expensive pair of breasts, which they then jiggled for the camera in the White House lawn, and it was a bit distasteful, really. But it went round the world because they were very proud of the breast job, and a lot of people said this just isn't what we expected for the White House. And so, we got a problem with the flag being shoved in our face, and we got a problem with these artificial mounds on this man's chest being shoved in our face, and we don't really think either reflect very well on society. So that was quite funny and ridiculous, really. And then the person who was showing off their very expensive boob job had just greeted the president. I mean, it wasn't somebody in the corner; it was someone at the center of the whole thing. But there was a rather more somber video, which was the flags in Regent Street, and there was some people taking the Union Jack, a lone Union Jack, down, the last one, as they were putting up a whole series of pride flags, and they really do look like swastikas nowadays, with the new embroidery that they have patterned on. And someone from the street shouted up to the guy taking it down, "You're taking the wrong effing flag down, mate. And what was surprising was the guy put it down and said, do you think we effing don't know that? We do, 100%. Oh, well, as long as you know, said the poor chap on the street, rather deflated. So here you have two people, ordinary passers-by, really resenting and saying, you're not in our name, but one's just a passerby and the other's an employee. The people in control of society are putting up the flags, and whenever flags get put up, it's a sign there's a power grab going on. Now, the thing that I thought was interesting about this, apart from the fact we're being inundated with flags of the rainbow cult to show they've taken over, is that that they can only happen with a straight majority wanting it to happen. And so if you go back to the idea that the ONS, the Office of National Statistics, put the gay population in Britain and pretty well everywhere in the West about 1.8%. So, then there's arguments, well, people didn't disclose. Okay, double it if you like. It doesn't matter. Double it to 4%. You've still got 96% of the straight people, which is why this is about straight people, saying, yeah, we're really happy with this. We're going to go along with it. And why did they do it? And the answer was because what the gay community was doing was selling the idea that human beings are essentially sexual creatures. We're here for sex. Sex is what defines us. What we want to do with sex goes to the heart of what it is to be a human being. And the problem is it's the straight community that's bought that. And it's essentially hedonism. And it's a failure of the churches to say, no, we're not here for sex. There are all kinds of things that we need, all kinds of parts of our appetite we need to curtail if we're going to live profound lives of integrity. But it struck me that there wasn't much point in trying to argue this, because our society is so addicted to sex now. There's no point in going to people and saying, actually, you're not here just for your sexual attraction. And I thought probably what we ought to try and do is to get people on the pride thing. Because if you just think laterally for a moment, the pandemic that's really striking at the root of our mental illness and our happiness is loneliness. Our cities are full of very lonely people. There's a great sense of isolation has crept in. And one of the most unpleasant aspects of being human being is being proud. Proud people are bullies. Proud people take control. Proud people diminish others. Proud people don't have friends. It's very hard to be part of a community where people are proud of themselves. And essentially, what you can do is make a case for saying that pride is not very nice, and actually it contributes to our pandemic of loneliness and therefore mental illness. And what we should be doing, I think, is saying to our neighbours, you shouldn't like pride. Forget the sex conversation. We can't have that with them. They're all too far gone and brainwashed. But they're not brainwashed about spiritual or ethical morality yet. You say, do you prefer humility or pride? Do you prefer somebody who says, well, actually, I'm graced, I'm lucky, it's not all about me, it's equally about you? Or do you want somebody who pushes themselves? And the answer is that we don't like proud people. And what we should be doing is arguing the toss on the spiritual virtues and saying, actually, humility is by far the better way. And maybe that way we can begin to undermine people's attachment to the whole pride and sex project.
Yeah, very good. One of the other things that we could also explore with people is the extent to which religious people have been criticized, Christians have been criticized for indoctrination. So the humanists will say we need to shut all religious schools because they're indoctrinating children, and we're standing up for their rights not to have this nonsense shoved down their throats. The secular society, they've always got campaigns about criticizing religious schools, faith schools. And Ed Fazer said something very interesting the other day about how the Catholic Church recognizes parental rights to such an extent that only maybe under danger of death, immediate death, could somebody override the parental consent to have their child baptized, that under no circumstances could like a kindly grandmother or aunt or uncle concerned about their relative baptize a baby without the parents' knowledge and consent. You just can't do it. We're advised that goes against parental rights. That's the church, and yet we at the same time we have, is it in California, I think it was, laws being put in place that say you can override parental consent, you can allow children to self-ID, you can allow them to opt for puberty blockers, you can give them operations that mutilate them, which cost a pretty penny, and that's okay. And then you think, well, there's a conversation to have. really, who are the ones who are really pushing this, indoctrinating our kids and forcing rather than allowing any kind of freedom? Mark?
Oh, I'm having a bad week. Just it's another load of old nonsense, isn't it? I saw that tweet from Ed Pfizer, and I just can't believe that we're in this position.
Yeah.
I can't believe that Californian. I'm with family to California, and you can see how it comes out of this idea that, Gavin's exactly right, that we've abandoned any sort of idea of an ethical sexuality. The church has, like the hierarchy has let us down so badly. And so those of us who do choose a different path, we have to self-educate before we choose that kind of action, in very small groups. And then you have to find someone who will agree to sort of live along those lines. And it's just all so difficult, it's difficult to be faithful in this day and age.
Kimberly
And then
Ellis.
you've got, I really, it just seems incredible. It just seems incredible. All of these things that we're talking about today, that these are things that are really happening, and they're not some sort of, dystopian Hollywood nightmare in a film that we're watching. It really does worry me.
Because it's gone so far. We were talking about the National Conservatism Conference I went to recently, and how it's been painted as extremist and right wing and far right. And you think, actually reflecting on it, it's a lot of the things are just common sense positions that 30, 40 years ago, pretty much most people would have held. But things have changed to such an extent, like you said. I know, Gavin, I think you were going to come in on Kimberly from your podcast, which was brilliant, by the way. If anyone hasn't listened, go and listen to the Merely Catholic podcast this week on the UN's sexualization of children and sexual rights, whatever that means, of children. That's a bit
really brave. I thought it was.
Very, very brave. Kevin. Tell us about that.
Well, it's starting off from the point you were making just now, Catherine, about the way in which the state was confronting parents and stripping them of their rights. And one of the things I hadn't realized was the extent to which this was part of a strategy. So for me, I think I'd seen most of the developments that Mark's been talking about, lamenting about, as being
whinging, I think, is the technical term.
No, the burn it down stuff has gone too far. But that all this hedonism and this progressive moral failure was just part of the accelerated collapse. But actually, it's not. Is a woman, American housewife, who found herself attending UN events. And as she did so, she discovered that there were position papers encouraging state bodies to defend other bodies to defend sexual rights of children. The idea of children having sexual rights is not something that would occur to me as a parent. If children have any rights, it's not to be sexual. And so she began to explore this, and then joining the dots, she discovered that one of the people pushing this, both in terms of funding and of coherence and political pressure, was Planned Parenthood. And so she suggests that it'd be very hard to be convinced that this wasn't part of a business plan. After all, if you're in Planned Parenthood and you make your money and your influence, your organization grows through abortions, one of the ways of getting more abortions is to bring in more young people into the whole area of unmonitored sexual activity. Young people are more careless; they get pregnant. As they get more pregnant, as they get more careless and they become more sexually active, they get more pregnant, and then you have more abortions. And Planned Parenthood grows stronger. And so, in the most disgusting and distasteful way, this doesn't just appear to be the collapse of society in moral chaos. It's actually being pushed over the cliff by a business plan. And so when one looks at the way when one looks at the way in which the state is setting itself against the parents, there are two reasons for it. One is that this is what socialism set out to do. And Kimberly Els has read more Engels than I have. That's how I came across her. I heard her quoting Engels to another podcast, and I thought, well, I should have read as much Engels as she has. And so I asked her to come and give her the quotes, and she did. And it's perfectly clear right from the very beginning, the socialist project intended to deprive parents of their rights and to replace them by the state. But has done so in a hypersexualized context now, in which Planned Parenthood is providing the fuel for this. And so,
well, it's working much better than the previous project, isn't it?
Yeah, it is. And one of the things I think. Sorry, Mark, go on. You take
well,
it.
no, that's what I think that's a brilliant point, and it's really interesting the way that communism failed to do exactly that, but through this hypersexualization, it seems to be working, and that it's like they sold the sexualization first. And everyone bought into that hedonistic sort of principle, and now you've said it loads of times. The goal has always been our kids, and why are drag queens? Don't ask why drag queens aren't allowed to come and do story time to our children. Ask why they want to do it in the first place. I just can't believe that people aren't asking these questions and making these connections. It's just extraordinary.
But I think it's because it forces them to have to question for their whole ethical system to come tumbling down. And that's too big a cost for them, because unless they believe in absolute values, unless they believe in objective truth, unless they have a faith, and this is the thing.
It's a great point.
It's very hard to know on what grounds you say that's it.
The whole thing comes tumbling down.
Which is why I think the key, we can have all these discussions, and we can have all these political conferences, and we can say what policies can we put in place. But at the end of the day, it's not good enough even for Tom Holland and Douglas Murray to go around and say we've got a Judeo-Christian culture that we have to retain and we have to be thankful for. We have to also participate in. It's crucial. It's not enough to say in theory it's good. We have to get back to the practice of our faith. And that's why evangelization is hugely important, and people need to recognize that. Right. How is it I say something and you both shut up?
Oh, because you sum it up so beautifully, there's nothing left for us to add. Normally, if Mark says something and I can see ways of improving it, and if I say something and Mark can see ways of improving it, but when you sum it up for us, Catherine, that's it. It's like great full stop. It's congratulations. It's a sign that we've succeeded. You've achieved it.
You're too kind. There's so much more we could talk about because it's been a little while since we have met. But I actually have to call this to an end because I'm off to Mass talking about participating in our faith, and we'll continue to pray for us three and the work that we do, and also all of you watching. I know that we all pray for those people who are supporting us, watching us, and also praying for us. So with thanks to you, and let's continue to do what we can to expose these things in the culture. That's it, I would say. From me, I'm Catherine Bennett.
Mark Lambert.
Gavin Ashenden. God bless you. God keep you. Until next time.